Welcome to Fresh Off the Boat. We are in season 2, and I'm delighted to be with Raghav Gupta, a student I've known, and he's successfully graduated from UCLA in the middle of the pandemic in 2020. He's a math and economics major and now runs a startup in the very interesting blockchain world, which I don't know much about. We'll learn more together. Okay, so Raghav, why don't you introduce yourself a little bit? I know I've
Yes. Glad to be here. I got to know Arjun first long ago, I think in class 10 maybe, when I was starting to build out the applications and stuff. And I think we've been in touch largely ever since. So I went to Vasant Valley School in Delhi. And from there on, I went to UCLA. I studied mathematics and economics. Came back in 2020 in the middle of the pandemic. Have been here since, working on a few interesting things and very excited to be here.
Fantastic. So when you look at getting into college, all that stress of being in Vasant Valley and kind of building your profile and sort of walking that path, what is it that you think worked for you in your applications to UCLA?
I think what really must have, I mean, obviously this is all just conjecture. I've never really, there's no way to find out. But I think what really worked is when you stop trying to like sort of the need, what people don't understand, there's no need to embellish. It genuinely is a lot about who you are, which is very surprising because like, growing up in India, it's much more numerical. It's much more concrete. Like, like, okay, what are your marks? What is this? What is that? But I think American admission process does value individuality. And the more you are able to sort of, represent that in an application. And I think being from the Indian schooling system, we were never really taught to sort of explore writing from that angle. So I remember my sessions with, I think, Malvika and Dhruv and all, and they were obviously like studying in America at the time. And they were sort of just like, how do you approach writing an essay? How do you sort of make something, although I am no expert at writing essays, not by a long shot, I will confess. But still, I think the most interesting part was that whole idea of how do you actually like sort of construct thoughts and not necessarily focus on facts and numbers.
Okay, great. So I think just putting your story together and having that interesting way to present your thoughts in an application. So when you look at choices and looking at making a final college list, the UCs being large public schools, and then I know that you had other colleges which were smaller private or mid-sized universities. Finally, when you ended up going to UCLA, what was the sense that did you get in terms of your research about schools and the actual experience in the initial sort of days?
So I think I was always largely clear that I don't want to go to a very small school, and more importantly, a very small town. Like I was not okay with like being in the middle of nowhere and what is American rural areas. So that my other big option was basically Carnegie Mellon, right? And sort of a large part was obviously my sister was already at UCLA, and obviously she told me a lot about it. But I think in the end, I didn't really go because I was never really focused on academia. Like that was not my primary focus in life. It was more about sort of where I can grow more. So I really went with the whole idea of what is the environment of the place, like the socioeconomic, I guess is the correct word. Like, and California seemed like the kind of place where you go and you sort of discover new opportunities. Obviously, Silicon Valley was moving to Silicon Beach at the time, so lots of interesting stuff was happening, still is, of course. But for me, it was not so much about the college as it was about the city.
Great. So you ended up in very, very close to Beverly Hills and
yeah,
beautiful campus, the UCLA. So describe what a experience students get at a school in that setting on a weekday or a weekend.
So I think the first word that comes to mind is overwhelming. And that's the first thing you're going to feel, right? Because UCLA on a given working day has almost 90,000 people on campus. It's basically a small town, like especially by American standards, it very much is a small town. So I think for the first time you do get hit, especially coming from Vasant Valley, which is a really small school. It's 30 kids a class, 3 sections, a grade. That's nothing. The first thing you feel is, wow. And when I say overwhelming, it doesn't necessarily mean that it was a bad overwhelming. It's also like sort of awe-striking, so to speak. But over time, I think you get used to it. The one thing that I hated about LA at first was how far everything was. Like it's not like Manhattan, you can't just walk down. It's pretty much like going to Santa Monica is either like an hour by public transport, 20 minutes, 25 minutes by Uber. So it needs to be a planned trip. But I think you start to appreciate that thing because, especially given UCLA's location, it is just so nice. The area around, you can walk any time of night. It's super open. It's just, it's not Manhattan, and in a good way. Uh, so I think weeks are quite busy, especially for people who are in clubs and stuff. Also because it is the quarter system, so you pretty much week 3, especially if you're in one of the STEM majors, week 3 onwards up until the end, you will have some sort of an assessment every week. So week 3 to week 10. But I think in the end it helps, because I would often see a lot of my friends who were in semester-based systems. They would sort of, it becomes that whole thing, right? Like we will study at the end, and then it's like 6 months of studying to do at the end, which kind of gets a little, at least it would for me. But because of this whole quarter system, you were pretty much on your toes. And even if you weren't acing it, you at least knew what is happening. Weekends in Los Angeles are obviously weekends in LA are weekends in LA. Everything you can imagine, right? From partying to cultural stuff, all kinds of things. Loved exploring the city, loved exploring the food, obviously. Koreatown and downtown LA is full of new places. So I think that way I loved LA because it is, I think it's one of those towns where you can choose to be in sort of total peace, and then within 30 minutes you can be right back in the middle of like action that's famous on a global scale, which is not really that common.
Yeah, that definitely gives a good perspective on what life can be as a UCLA student. What about the academic rigor? As you mentioned, it sort of progresses in week 3 of every quarter. And the quarter system, many students who might be listening might not be familiar with the semester or the quarter system. What do you think worked in your case in the quarter system? What were the issues you initially thought you would face?
So yeah, very quickly, for whoever's not familiar with the quarter system, it's obviously dividing the year into 4 quarters rather than just 2 semesters. And 1 quarter is the summer, so it's 3 quarters of classes. I think I enjoyed the quarter system. Like I said, it forces you to be on your toes. The one thing that I did notice about academic rigor and just academic quality in general, which I think applies both for semester and quarter systems, is how dependent the same class is on the professor that's teaching it. Like three professors will teach 1 class, right? But they would just be miles apart. And I'm talking about mathematics, right? So this is all, so you can imagine if mathematics can be 3 different types of ways of being taught, 3 different things are happening. Some of the most objective classes must be like way more, which was really cool and kind of risky at the same time, because obviously you may not agree with everyone's style of teaching. But I was lucky to have some really good professors. That does not mean easy professors, by the way. I don't mean good as in like they gave easy. Many of them didn't. In fact, one of my first classes was this integration class, who's supposed to be this one monster of a professor whose medians used to be in the 40s on good days and stuff like that. But I think it's one of the best classes I took because, sort of he really explored. He didn't say, he never sort of said, okay, how do you solve this question? But he started with, what is integration? What does it even mean? What are you even doing? What is the use of it? And I think that was awesome. So one thing I would tell everyone listening in to do is research your professors, maybe even go to a class of theirs, another, like in the previous quarter, if you possibly can. So that's not necessary. They're all rated on that. I forgot the website, but rate my professor, I think. Definitely check that out because it makes a huge difference.
Great. So as you started thinking about your major choices, and I know economics was one of your interests, so you did a double major, or was it a major minor combination?
No, so it was actually neither. Funnily enough, it was something called a joint major at UCLA. They called it economics and math, but it was basically math. It was like economics of a very sort of, I don't want to say very elementary level, but still, like the math was at a way higher level than the economics was. Well, yes, both math and economics have some subjects I've been interested in forever, actually. That being said, I somehow did not enjoy the economics bit as much. And whenever someone asks me, I always say that if, like, don't take economics as a major unless you really don't want to do anything else. Only the reason for that is as interesting a subject it is far too theoretical, and they claim it to be like you need to know how the world works and stuff. But anything that you will learn, especially at a graduate level, it will first start with 5 assumptions, right? And like, like the assumption will be like, okay, the consumer is rational, everything else is constant. Within those 5 assumptions, and I get it, obviously the theoretical models to work off of, but I think that there are better subjects to study, especially in America. In America, or at least at UCLA, where like just the sheer variety of courses is so good. Math was awesome. I think math just got a whole new perspective on what mathematics means. Because in India, I think growing up in CBSE, it's very didactic, right? It's like, okay, here's how you solve a question. Here are a few questions, move on. Never really going into what math is, what it stands for, how it came about. I think UCLA, some of my professors really went deep into that, and that was awesome. I love both subjects. I still do.
Let's talk a little bit more about mathematics, because very often students define it as dealing with problem sets which are impossible, and then kind of figuring it out.
Well,
so
yes.
What was it like for you?
Yeah, it was regularly dealing with problem sets. And by the way, just so you know, I'm not a 4.0 student. I'm not even close. I'm like, I do okay. Like I don't do badly, but like nothing very special. And yes, it is often dealing with problem sets which seem impossible. But the good thing is, like, sort of as nerdy as it is, say impossible, why, right? Is it impossible because they're made to be impossible? Is it impossible because they force you to sort of think outside the box? And until you can strike that thing, it's going to seem impossible. And I think it was a lot more of the latter. It was not questions that were like just mundane solving that is so complicated that people ought to screw up science somewhere and all that. It was a lot more about application of ideas, application of concepts. It's not easy. It's definitely not easy, but it's nowhere near impossible. Like some of the other famous majors are way, way tougher, I would say.
So switching gears, do you think you started using opportunities at UCLA in societies and clubs which are related to economics, math, or it was completely different?
No, it was completely different. To be honest, I do regret not being involved in as many clubs as I should have. I started the crypto club at UCLA. I started a cricket club at UCLA, but I was not really an active part of any other clubs as such, which, by the way, was a huge mistake on my part. I did try out for like moot court and stuff, but I didn't get in. But yeah, to be very honest, I just didn't take part in that many clubs to really be able to answer that question well. But the ones that I'm interested in had nothing to do with math or economics.
So you're starting a club, cryptocurrency. How does it work? How does one start a club at a big university like UCLA?
Fairly straightforward. There's forms online, and I mean, it's just filling forms, right? Obviously, the problems may change when you're scaling up. We never really got to that stage because I think cryptocurrency was not even a fraction of the buzzword that it is today. It was just around. So maybe, I think by the end we had about 50 members, maybe 40 members. So that was not really a stage where you have a budget and your planned activities, although you are supposed to submit a framework of a budget. But to start a club is basically forms, and you need a fixed number of signatories. And obviously you have to write a manifesto and like tell them what the club is all about, but there's no expenses attached to it. Nothing that you can't do from your laptop.
All right. So one last question. And before we sort of jump into another set of questions on our LinkedIn version of this podcast is, if you were to give a message to students who are struggling to figure out college choices, or who are currently in college, who are grappling with so many uncertainties, what would you have for them?
I think, well, especially for the people in big colleges, I guess I can say this: go try stuff. I know firsthand that it can be intimidating to just go up and like just try out for a club. And I know when I say firsthand, I mean firsthand. Like I was not comfortable trying out a moot court for the first time. It's not a thing here. But I think the best thing you can do is just go try things, especially in these UCs and like big colleges. There's just so much stuff happening that you go around enough, you will strike gold. Like it's a treasure mine. It's only a matter of who continues to keep digging till they strike something, really, of resources, of skills, or of anything you can imagine, honestly.
Fantastic. So immersing oneself in the community, trying out new things, and then challenging yourself to do even tough things. Fantastic. Thank you so much, Raghav, and looking forward to following your journey as an entrepreneur. And
Thank you for having me.
inviting you to our future panels. Bye.
Bye.